And now let's have some fun with grammar, said no one ever, except maybe Buddy, because grammar is not fun and most people struggle with it. English grammar's filled with rules and exceptions to rules, and keeping them straight is hard for everyone, even those of us who are allegedly good at it. Yet grammar is important because you're continually judged by the way you communicate, whether that's in speaking or writing. You always want to sound like you belong, and when you're communicating academically, you need to sound academically competent, and that means using correct grammar. I've tried teaching grammar just about every way there is, and I have yet to find one that's best, although I've test-driven many that were pretty much meh. I think the answer is that the best method of instruction depends on the student. With these videos, my goal is to give you a chance to hear and see me explain grammar rules with examples, just as if we were in class together, except you can pause or replay sections to learn at your own pace. As you probably noticed, I'm presenting the video to you through Edpuzzle, so there are comprehension checks periodically. If you miss a question, review the material before continuing. If you're still struggling, reach out via email or ask me in class. The chances are pretty good that if you're confused, someone else is as well. I've designed these videos to go with the grammar handbook, which is in the yellow section at the back of your Norton Field Guide to Writing textbook. For this class, grammar is divided into 3 units: sentences, language, and punctuation. Within each unit, there are 8 to 11 lessons. There are pre- and post-study diagnostic tests for each unit. With the pre-diagnostics, I'll give you a 100 just for taking the test. Try, but also be aware that I don't expect you to know all the answers. Otherwise, why would you be in this class, right? The score that really counts is the unit post-test. That's where we see what you've learned. Between the pre and post are quizzes for each lesson within the unit. For example, there are 9 lessons in Unit 1, sentences. The lessons are all pretty short, except for the one on verbs, and it could practically be a unit all by itself. It's a good idea to take notes as we cover the material. You can use those on the quiz, and you can also use them when you're writing, because remember that the goal is not to pass the quiz or even to pass the class. The goal is to improve your writing. Passing is what happens because you improved your writing. Before I launch into Lesson 1 sentence elements, I want to make sure that you've already taken the pre-study diagnostic on sentences. If you haven't, would you pause the video and do that now? Thanks. Great! Now that you've completed the pre-study diagnostic on sentences, let's dive right into Lesson 1, Elements of a Sentence. You'll find this information in your textbook on pages HB4 through HB7. The basic keystone of English is the sentence. A sentence has 2 basic parts, a subject and a predicate. The subject usually includes a noun or pronoun and names the topic of the sentence. At its most basic, the subject tells who or what is doing something. The predicate, which always includes a verb, tells what the subject is doing. For example, this sentence, birds fly. The subject is birds, the predicate is fly. In the sentence, birds are feathered vertebrates, the subject is still birds, but the predicate is are feathered vertebrates. So the subject and the predicate can contain more than one word. Birds of many kinds is the subject. Fly south in the fall is the predicate. Flying in a V formation is the subject, and is characteristic of geese is the predicate. One of the flock, subject, leads the others, predicate. Flying in a V formation is characteristic of geese. You get the picture. A sentence can contain more than one subject and/or more than one verb. These are called compound subjects or compound verbs. Birds and butterflies fly south in the fall. The compound subject is birds and butterflies. Fly tells us that both birds and butterflies fly. In this sentence, the subject is birds, and we have a compound verb, fly and return. The subject of the sentence doesn't always have to come first. Sometimes the verb does, as in, here comes the sun. Even though it's at the end, the subject is still the sun because it is what is performing the action. It's the same in this next sentence. In the attic were old photographs and toys. The compound subject is old photographs and toys that were in the attic. The key to finding the subject is to ask what or who is performing the action. To find the verb, ask what action is being performed. Every clause has to have an explicit subject, even if all of the clauses are about the same subject. Look at this sentence. Although the dinner cost too much, impressed my guests. We know the speaker is talking about dinner impressing the guest, but he still has to have a subject, like it. Here's one of those famous exceptions. Commands, like eat smaller portions at each meal, have an implied subject, the understood you. Sometimes in informal conversation, speakers emphasize a noun subject by repeating it as a pronoun. My friend Jen, she changed her name to June. In academic writing, though, you don't repeat the subject this way. The visiting students, they were detained at the airport, requires the they be deleted. But what about sentences that begin with there or it? Those are called expletives. No, not the four-letter kind. That makes the meaning explicit or clear kind. They go in front of the verb, such as, there's no place like home, or it is both instructive and rewarding to work with young children. You can also rephrase a sentence to get rid of the expletive and streamline the sentence. So let's delete to work with young children, replace it with the phrase working with young children, and then add a period after rewarding. So we have working with young children is both instructive and rewarding. I mentioned clauses earlier. Let's take a look at those in a little more detail. A clause is a group of words with a subject and a predicate. An independent clause can function alone as a sentence, such as our old friend, birds fly. A subordinate clause begins with a subordinating conjunction, such as because, as, or which, and cannot stand alone as a sentence, because birds fly. A subordinate clause must be paired with an independent clause, such as my yard is now quiet because most of the birds flew south. My yard is now quiet is an independent clause. It's a complete sentence all on its own. Most of the birds flew south is also an independent clause. But when you add the subordinating conjunction because, it becomes a subordinate clause. In this sentence, although is the subordinating conjunction. They travel really far is a subordinate clause. And the birds always find their way back is the independent clause. I like to think of the subordinating conjunction as kryptonite that weakens the super independent clause into a dependent subordinate clause. There are a bunch of these kryptonite words like after, although, as, when, while, until, because, before, if, and since. You may have heard them called AWUBIS words, which is just a mnemonic to help people remember them all. A phrase is a word group that makes sense but lacks a subject, a verb, or both, and so cannot stand alone as a sentence. Some common ones are prepositional, appositive, participial, gerund, and infinitive. This is one of those things that sounds a lot harder than it is, so hang with me. I promise it's not difficult. A prepositional phrase starts with a preposition such as at, from, of, or in, and usually ends with a noun or pronoun, like at school, from home, or in bed. They usually function as adjectives or adverbs. Prepositions explain when or where something is in relation to something else. For example, the day after the World Series, everyone in San Francisco celebrated. After the World Series tells us when the celebrating happened, and in San Francisco tells us where. Those are prepositional phrases. And a positive is a phrase that gives non-essential information. It's so extra. This is information about the noun or pronoun, and it functions as a noun. My brother, who's a computer programmer, lives in Seattle. Who is a computer programmer is the extra that I threw in because I'm so extra. Appositives are usually set off with commas too, so that makes them easier to spot. A participial phrase has a present participle or a past participle of a verb plus any objects, modifiers, or complements. It functions as an adjective. And an adjective, by the way, is a word that describes a noun or tells which or how. Present participles are easy to spot because they have an ing word, and they are describing a noun, such as brimming with optimism. I headed over to the neighborhood watering hole and waited. I finished the assignment sitting in the library. Both of these examples, brimming and sitting, signal there's a participial phrase, and they both tell how. A study from Princeton, issued at the same time as the Duke study, showed that women in the sciences reported less satisfaction in their jobs and less of a sense of belonging than their male counterparts. This sentence is a little harder because it uses a past participle, issued, but it's still a phrase describing a noun and specifies which, in this case, which Princeton study. Gerunds are similar to present participles. They also end in ing. The difference is that a gerund functions as a noun, so it can be the subject of a sentence, such as asking for candy on Halloween was called trick-or-treating, but asking for candy on November 1st was called begging. Both gerunds in the sentence begin with asking for candy on. An infinitive phrase includes an infinitive, which is to plus the base form of a verb like to read or to write, and any objects, modifiers, and complements. It functions as a noun, an adjective, or an adverb. Again, they're easy to spot because they begin with the word to. The plan to commit more troops requires top-level approval. To commit more troops is telling us which plan. So this infinitive phrase is functioning as an adjective. In the sentence, the point of ribbon decals is to signal that we support our troops, the infinitive phrase is to signal that we support our troops. The verb is links the subject of the sentence, the point, to its complement to signal that we support our troops. So it describes or identifies it. And that, ladies and gents, was a lot deeper into the grammar quagmire than I intended to go today. So let's back quietly away and pretend we didn't just go there. In Lesson 1, Sentence Elements, we talked about the basic building blocks of every sentence, the subject and the predicate. Sentences can have compound subjects and or predicates. In sentences that begin with the expletives there or it, The subject comes after the verb. An independent clause is one that can stand alone. It has both a subject and a predicate. A subordinate clause begins with a subordinating conjunction or a wubis word. They have to be attached to an independent clause because they're not a complete thought on their own. Phrases are groups of words that make sense but are missing a subject, a verb, or both. They also require an independent clause. We looked at prepositions that usually explain where one thing is in relation to another, appositives that give extra information, participials that function as adjectives, gerunds, which are ing verbs that function as nouns, and infinitives, which are to plus the base form of the verb and can function as nouns, adjectives, or adverbs. Look at you, already done with Lesson 1, Sentence Elements. Check Canvas to see if there's a short quiz on sentence elements, and in Lesson 2, we'll talk about sentence fragments. Thanks for stopping by. And thanks to Slides Carnival and Unsplash for their help with my slides templates. See you next time.